Judges at the World Court also ruling on a case in which the Ukraine accused Russia of violating an anti-terrorism treaty by funding pro-Russian forces, including militias who shot down a passenger jet, and discrimination against ethnic Tartars and Ukrainians in Crimea, which Russia had declared annexed in 2014. These are developments happening between tonight and on Friday, and Khayelihle Khumalo, our SABC News reporter, joins us now. Kay, there are these two cases which the court is ruling on. Let's begin with the 2014 downing of that aircraft MH17. Russia, by the way, denying any involvement in that incident. Share with us what's at stake here.
Well, obviously, I mean, what is quite important in this regard, Iman, is that two conventions really under the scrutiny here. So the first one around the financing of terrorism, and of course the issue around the racial discrimination, because those are two conventions that are used by Ukraine to say that with the downing, for example, of the Malaysian aircraft, some of the funds might have just been, just sourced from Russia, used by these militia groups to down the aircraft. But also in the main, so far the court has ruled that Russia might have violated some of these obligations because they had to make sure that those who really just committed these crimes had to be prosecuted and brought to book, so to speak. So the ICJ is still going through the judgment, but also this is quite important as well, because we also know that on Friday, this coming Friday, the ICJ will also be ruling on the issue of the Genocide Convention. Ukraine again bringing this particular case, especially because Ukraine is saying the eastern parts of Ukraine is quite restive since Russia annexed that part, the Crimea, Donetsk, and all those areas.
So there are a lot of issues at stake. You talk about today's ruling. The judges are still going through that judgment. When is it likely to reach completion, and when will we know the very latest on how they will move forward on that?
So most definitely. So the ICJ, so around 6 p.m. or so, South African time, they should be done in terms of their orders that they're issuing. But also what is quite important in this regard is that, I mean, all of this happens as we know that Ukraine is desperately fighting this war against Russia. And we've seen some very previous instances where some people are pointing out that there's donor fatigue, especially with what's happening in Gaza. So I think it's happening at a very critical time where they're trying to get momentum in terms of getting the artillery on the ground, especially because when you look at their counter offensive on the ground, Iman, it hasn't been quite successful. So this is happening at a very critical point.
You know what's so interesting about these matters is how the ICJ as a court of justice, international justice, particularly when it comes to the issue of genocide, has been thrust into global spotlight. And so these matters are all under the world scrutiny and in a way that perhaps wasn't there previously. So it's a big one going forward. On Friday, you talked about Kyiv saying that Moscow was breaching this now well-known 1948 Genocide Convention by saying that their invasion was used and justified to stop the alleged genocide of Russian speakers in Ukraine. Again, how big a case is this, even beyond the immediate political issues between these two countries?
It's a very massive case, but also, once again, it's really just putting under the microscope the international law, the effectiveness of this particular court, but also, most importantly, for the Ukrainians who are saying that this is about their sovereignty, their territorial integrity, and all those very important aspects, especially because with Russia saying that in the main, in the eastern parts of Ukraine, they decided to invade, just in 2014, because the assumption from Moscow was that, some of the Russian speakers were ill-treated by the authorities in Ukraine. And of course, that has been vehemently rejected by Ukraine. They're saying this is Russia having the nostalgia about the old Soviet Union. So hence, they are invading their neighbor. So it's quite a very important case. And once again, the ICJ having a very colossal task in terms of making sure that the human rights violations, all those kinds of things are really just avoided in this instance.
And I think, again, as we've seen with the matter that South Africa has brought before the ICJ, that if it does decide that this matter between Russia and Ukraine can move forward, it will probably take many more months before it's decided that hearings will go forward and when those can be scheduled. So a long waiting period ostensibly lying before us. Khayelihle Khumalo, as always, thank you very much. You'll be watching those developments closely, and as soon as you know, we'll know, and we'll share that with the nation. Now, SABC News reporter Khayelihle Khumalo.